Hi, this is Kelvy. I just wanted to add a bit of context before sharing an excerpt of a video from a session last year on containers, or containers was one part of the session, and I've extracted that video and tried to add on to it at the end. So here I am now, then there'll be me from another point in time, and then coming back at the end with a little more context and a parable, and then a personal story to try to land it all for you. Without a sense of container and a common understanding of containers, none of this meeting or this joining or this creation or us being here would have been possible. Containers are holding spaces. It's a word that can sound very rigid, like this is a container for tea, or a container can be a bucket or something that holds water. But we can think of them also as flexible vessels or things that can expand to hold something that wants to be born. And without containers, without these types of holding spaces, from my experience, it's very difficult to be able to show up and really create a space of possibility. You know, you can imagine something happening, but without it grounding and having somewhere to land, the possibility can just fly in the air. So containers offer a landing place for what could be what's floating in the air to find some substance, to come down. Containers work at levels of self and team and organization and system and culture, and we could say planet. We could go as far out or as close in as we want with this concept of these energetic holding spaces. They're places for transformation. So I was talking about how possibility can land in a container. If a container is strong and solid, then things can heat up inside. Differences can be expressed and named and looked at. And I can say, wow, you know, I don't see it that way. And somebody else can say, well, yeah, I don't see it the way you're seeing it. But because of the trust in the relationship or in the reason that we're brought together, there's a wish to inquire together. So the quality of inquiry becomes stronger than the dissonance or the difference between the people. In containers, in the space of containers, there's a sense of time slowing down. We're more sensitive to delicacy. So I think of times when it's been late or, you know, you're sitting around a fire with people, and at first there's lots of sharing, and then maybe at a certain point, there's a rhythm that starts to shift, and the field has a quality that changes, and the actual pulse of things can settle into something that has a more natural and harmonic rhythm. And I know that might sound abstract, but if you can think about a time where you've settled into something or into someone or into a situation where things have slowed down and become more clear because there's a breath to it, that's an indication that there's a good container at work. Another thing about containers is that it's a place for learning and growth to take place. When I'm scribing, I need to hold, you know, we all need to hold ourselves at the wall in a certain way. And if we don't hold ourselves well and manage our own energy, it's very difficult to draw something for other people. So the first container really starts here. And then we start to activate the learning space and have it radiate out. So I'd like to add a few other thoughts on containers and then share one story that might help bring it alive as a concept into our lived experience. One notion is that when we look at the shape of a container, how it's drawn, it's something like this, which on one hand or on one side of it, it's something that's closed. Like on the bottom, it's closed. So I have my mug, and here it's a closed shape, but on the top, it's open, and it has a breathing quality to it. So I didn't want to lose that notion that there is a strength to it, but there's also a real openness and expansion to it as well. There's another quality to containers, which is that it lets our whole selves come out and alive. And this is important when we're scribing, not only for holding ourselves at the wall, like I already mentioned, but for bringing alive the possibility in others. So there might be that quiet person in the room who's sitting in the back and maybe doesn't feel enough confidence to come forward with their voice. And if we can expand our sense of a container to that person and help support them in an invisible way, so it's not in a direct way, it's through the heart, really, through the muscle of the heart, perhaps that person will be able to bring themselves into the room. So the work of holding containers can be explicit, where you have an agreement with somebody and you know that you're entering a challenging conversation or a certain situation that requires some strength and agreements. It also might be very quiet work that happens really from the side of the room that nobody except for you is aware that you're actually doing. So there's a parable, before I tell my own personal story, and I learned this from someone named Perry Chickering, and it's paraphrased here. There was an aging master who grew tired of his apprentice complaining, and so one morning he sent him out to get some salt. When the apprentice returned, the master instructed the young man to put a handful of salt in a glass of water and drink it. And then he asked, "How does it taste?" And of course, the apprentice said, "Bitter," and he spit it out. And the master chuckled. He laughed. The two walked in silence down to a nearby lake, and the master again asked the young man to put a handful of salt in the water, this time of the lake. "Now drink from the lake. How does it taste?" And the apprentice said, "Fresh." "Do you taste the salt?" asked the master. "No," said the young man. At this, the master sat beside the young man and offered, "The pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in life remains the same, exactly the same, but the amount of bitterness we taste depends on the container into which we put the pain. So when you're in pain, the only thing you can do is to enlarge your sense of things, stop being a glass, and become a lake. I think of that often when I'm in situations that feel like they have some struggle in them, that my understanding of how much I can hold needs to grow. The boundary of my model of understanding needs to expand so that I can be larger myself and hold other people and hold the system and hold the suffering and the joy, both, the larger range of emotions of the room and of the system. And that's really how this is related to system scribing, because the container is, as I said before, it operates at all these tiers, at all these levels. And in order to work at the system level, we need to be able to put our arms around it and our heart around it. It's not only understanding it conceptually, it's in our very being, having the ability to expand to meet the complexity of the system itself. There's a story that I'll share now that's more personal, that has to do with a time when I really experienced what containers were and could be, even without that language. And it has to do with my grandmother. And I would go visit her. My whole life I would visit her independently. We had family gatherings, but we also had a lot of independent time with different family members. And so I would visit her, and often we would go to a local diner. She lived in New York City. And when I was home from school, from college, I would go say hi, and we would go to the diner. One time we went, she was probably in her late 70s or early 80s. And so we walked very slowly from her apartment to the diner. And then we got there and we sat down, and we would order things, probably the same thing every single time. I would get a grilled cheese sandwich and a milkshake, and she probably had a tuna fish sandwich and, an iced tea, into which she put 8 sugars. And so we had this rhythm. That's my point. We had this rhythm to our connection, and we would be sitting there. And one time we were just talking about general things. And then she said, "I'm really curious. What are things like for you these days? What is school really like?" And you know, it was some question like that. And it really gave me pause, because she wasn't just asking, you know, what do you do with your time? She was asking, what is life like for you? And she cared about me. She wasn't asking for data. She was asking because she loves me. She loved me. And she wanted to know about the quality of my life and about my being. And it was at that moment that I really, you know, it was feeling the love, but it was also realizing that there was a way to open people up. And she wasn't asking about specifics, and she wasn't asking about the parties I went to. She was just asking about my life and me. And I felt really loved and really like there was something to come out. You know, I felt like there was something to come out. So that's the story with my grandma. And in the spirit of understanding how containers play a role in our own lives, here's a short practice that you can either respond to through writing, or, which I would encourage, respond to through a drawing. And there are just a few questions, no time limit. First one is, who holds me? What containers are around me that help me have a sense of possibility and potential? Who do I hold? What in my life would I like held? By whom? And what would it take for this to happen? So again, who holds me? Who do I hold? What in my life would I like held? And what would it take for this to happen, for something in my life that's not currently held to be held? What might that look like? Good luck if you choose to do the practice. If not, I hope you have enjoyed this bit on containers and that it gives you something to think about as you engage with other people and the world. Thanks.